And in just a few minutes, those drivers will be hurtling down into Turn 1. Yas Marina Circuit is a 3.4-mile racetrack built on the man-made Yas Island. In addition to the 21 corners, it features 2 very long straights. Now these will be the drivers' main overtaking chances today into Turn 8 and Turn 11.
We're looking good so far. race so far. Fastest lap of the race. Keep this up. You worked hard for that one. Congratulations.
Well, what a drive that was to take the win for Prema today. As we look back on a thrilling race here today, we can now see the drivers take their places on the podium. It's a familiar sight by now, as it's another successful F2 win for Prema. We see a new name at the top of the championship table as we reach the end.
So that was an exciting race from our perspective. Let's have yours. 2019 Formula 2. It was all to play for, but things didn't. Has this season been easy? Great. Well, that's everything.
Great. You're done with the technician's briefing. Look, I know we've got a lot to get through in FP1, but Will Buxton's been pushing for a quick interview before you head out on track. Don't worry too much. He's a good lad. He's just over there. These media appearances are important for a few reasons. They'll help build your profile and your brand. Plus, your team will get a real boost to their motivation if they hear you praising them. Will, as promised, sorry to keep you waiting.
Oh, mate, not a problem at all, not a problem.
Look, we've got to be out on track in about 5 minutes for FP1, so we can only spare you a couple of minutes max. Is that going to be enough time?
More than enough. We're already set up. Cool, let's go. So, we're used to seeing rookies in Formula One every year, but this season there's a youngster that's arrived with perhaps a little more interest in them than usual. And that's because while they've been successful at every level of their career from karts all the way through to Formula 2, they've somehow managed to stay pretty much under the radar. They don't have that luxury anymore though. They're in Formula 1. Millions of people around the world watching their every move, both on and off the racetrack. So let's take some time to get to know them a little bit better.
So tell us a little about yourself. What's the thing you're most excited about being here in Formula One? After your successful junior career, you must have had a lot of interest. What drew you to sign for your current team? What would you say is going to be the biggest challenge for you this season?
Really appreciate your time, but I know you're very keen to get on. Best of luck out there.
This first race of the season is always quite difficult for us trackside, and for those back at the factory as well, as it's the first time the car has run since winter testing. The more consistent mileage you can get in these sessions, the happier we'll be.
In the unforgiving world of Formula One, free practice sessions are a vital part of any Grand Prix weekend.
When you get a chance, make sure to run some of our practice programs. They don't all need to be done in one session, but there's valuable data there to help race strategy and car development. There's a few cars out on track. Perhaps we should get out there before it gets busy. Okay, let's talk about this track. Albert Park has a lot of tricky high-speed corners. Turn 1 is a good example, and also the left-right through 11 and 12, where you need to be as daring as you can with the entry speed. of this session, we need to return 2 sets of tyres. We'll give back the 2 most worn sets, so we may as well get the most out of them while we can. They won't be available for the rest of the weekend, though, so don't run too hard on anything you might need later on. Okay, just want to remind you to keep an eye on your tyre temperatures, which you can do on the temperature panel of the MFD. We monitor carcass temperature and surface temperature, and you'll get the best performance when they're both inside a normal operating window. Surface temps tend to fluctuate faster, so try a few laps with the data open and get a feel for how to control them. That's our fastest lap so far. Good enough for P3. laps of fuel remaining. Out of fuel? Almost out of fuel. You need to pit within the next 2 laps. Come in this lap, please. Box this lap. When driving with the pit assist disabled, you'll need to be mindful of your speed when entering the pit lane. If you hit the limiter line too fast, you'll pick up a penalty. Watch the on-screen prompts that show your target speed and distance to the limiter line. That's P1. some point before qualifying, let's get our track acclimatization program complete. It'll help us identify any specific problem areas on the circuit.